Well, hello everyone. So, welcome to our show. This is the Animation Industry Trends. I'm Matt Kasnick, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Animation Industry Club. And today we're going to be speaking to some of the creators of Sony Pictures Animation and Netflix's Vevo. And we are really very, very excited. For those of you on YouTube, please subscribe to us to access our weekly shows. And on Discord, tune in every week on Wednesday, 12:30 in the Lightbox Expo Discord. And on Clubhouse, follow us on our club to access more talks. So I'm going to introduce one of our co-founders. Allison Mann is the co-founder of the Animation Industry Club on Clubhouse. She is a creative producer who strategizes development and talent for feature films, international and series-based projects. In addition to that, she is the CEO of the Brick Foundation, an organization set up to solve how to create new access points for women and people from underrepresented groups so they can excel at creative leadership and to enable culture change through engaging and empowering talent. Allison, thank you so much for doing this today.
Thank you, Matt. Don't forget to tell people who you are, too.
Oh, I always forget that part. And I am Matt Kasnick, and I am the director of the Animation is Film Festival, which is returning to Los Angeles this October 22nd through the 24th. And I am also very excited to be here.
Yeah, such a powerhouse group of panelists today. And who are they, Matt?
And I'm going to do that right now. I'm doing all of this off of my phone. So just bear with me for 1 second. So, Brandon Jeffords, who is the co-director, along with director Kirk D'Amico of Sony Pictures Animation original animated musical Vevo, which features brand new songs from Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creative force behind the Broadway smash Hamilton. Jeffords previously served as the head of story on Sony Pictures Animation's fully CG animated Smurfs reboot, Smurfs: The Lost Village. Before that, Jeffords worked on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2, where he also served as the head of story. Among other projects, Jeffords also served as the storyboard artist on Sony Pictures Animation's Open Season 2 and Open Season 3. Before becoming a story artist for Sony Pictures Animations, Jeffords worked as a storyboard artist at Nickelodeon Animation Studios on the hit TV series Kung Fu Panda: The Legend of Awesomeness. He also served as a storyboard artist on the Looney Tunes show. Jeffords began his animation career at RealFX within the art department as a concept artist. While at RealFX, Jeffords worked on various commercials, TV movies, and an animated series. This experience paved the way for his career in the film industry as a storyboard artist. He is a graduate of Ringling College of Art and Design with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree specializing in illustration. Brandon, thank you so much for being here.
Yes,
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Woohoo.
Yong is the head of layout for Sony Pictures Animation's original animated musical Vevo, which features, I guess I don't have to do that every time. Jhun is responsible for the film's cinematography as he plans camera angles, camera movements, composition, and character choreography in each shot of the film. Prior to joining Sony Pictures Animation, Jhun most recently worked at Blue Sky Studios, developing shows as director and serving as layout advisor on Spies in Disguise and Ferdinand. He previously served as head of layout at DreamWorks Animation for 14 years, bringing his unique vision to Academy Award-nominated projects such as Kung Fu Panda, in which his cinematography choices were influenced by his Korean background, and The Croods, in which he collaborated with cinematographer Roger Deakins and pulled from the perspective of stylized documentary, which he had never done before at the studio. He also worked on such hits as Trolls, Shrek Forever After, Over the Hedge, and the TV series Father of the Pride. He received his BFA from the University of Seoul in Korea and his master's degree in computer animation at the School of Visual Arts in New York. He currently resides in Buchanan, California with his wife, their 2 kids, and their golden doodle. And he's a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences since 2016. Yong, always great to see you.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. Welcome. What am I saying? Welcome, everyone.
Erika Dapkewicz, who's the lead editor of the Sony Pictures Animation's Vevo. In her role, she oversees bringing the story to life on screen by seaming together visuals, dialogue, and sound effects, among other components, to create scenes through each stage of production, from layout to animation and lighting, and eventually the film's final look. Prior to joining Sony Pictures Animation, she served as lead editor on several DreamWorks Animation projects, such as Puss in Boots, Monsters vs. Aliens, The Croods, Flushed Away, and Trolls Holiday. She began her career at Walt Disney Animation Studios on editorial crews for features like Lilo and Stitch, John Henry, Mulan, and Pocahontas. In 2012, she co-wrote and directed a live-action film of The Orchard titled Paradox Alice. Growing up, she wanted to be a filmmaker and storyteller, and Disney's 1991 Beauty and the Beast inspired her to focus on animated films. She went on to earn a Bachelor of Arts degrees in film and television from California State University, Fullerton, as well as taking editing and cinematography courses at the University of California, Los Angeles. Erika, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm just trying to find the mute button.
Joe Moser is the character art director on Vevo. In his role, he designs the film's main characters and creates the overall look and style of all characters. Prior to joining Sony Pictures Animation, he served as lead character designer at DreamWorks Animation for features such as Boss Baby, How to Train Your Dragon 2, The Croods, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, and Penguins of Madagascar, and at Walt Disney Animation Studios in films such as Bolt, Meet the Robinsons, and Chicken Little. At Disney, he also worked on classics including The Emperor's New Groove, Hercules, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. He was born and raised in San Diego, California. Go Padres! He knew he wanted to work in animation from a young age after having grown up admiring his Nona's paintings hung on the wall throughout his grandparents' house. His passion was solidified when his parents brought him the book Animation by Preston Blair, which he studied cover to cover. He attended the California Institute of the Arts and studied character animation. He currently lives in Tarzana, California with his wife, daughter, and there's several pets, including 3 dogs, an African dwarf frog, and a fish. His dog, Charlie's bark, can be heard as the puppy in Disney's Bolt. Oh, that's interesting. And lastly, Denise Koyama is the story artist on Sony Pictures Animation Vevo. She has worked for 27 years as a story artist for television, direct-to-video, and features, earning 3 Annie Award nominations and 1 Daytime Emmy nomination. And her most notable credits include work on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the Hotel Transylvania film series, The Smurfs, Surf's Up, Shark's Tale, Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron, and the Tigger movie. She is also a glass lampwork artist, and her work and tutorials have included several publications, including the Japan Lampwork Society's Lam magazine, The Flow, and Glassline magazines. She was an official glass tester for, Morbaz Boriscali Glass. I'm sorry, I butchered that. I'm really sorry. I'm reading this off of my phone because my computer is having problems. And was featured in several advertising campaigns. She holds a Kaiden Advanced degree in, in Ikemba, I'm butchering this.
Denise, how do you say it?
Denise, I'm sorry.
What is the advanced degree that you hold yourself in? Unmute.
Ikebana. Ikenobo Ikebana.
Okay, I apologize for that. In flower arrangement, has exhibited her work at the University of California in Irvine. She's working to convert an abandoned orchard into an avocado farm and printmaking studio with her family. She's the proud stepmom of 3 daughters and a proud auntie to 2 nephews. Thank you so much for being here, everyone.
Yes. I feel very unaccomplished compared to all these humans and all the things they're doing. It's very impressive, everyone. Very impressive. I would love to kick off the conversation with a little bit of history about Vevo. Like, how did it come to be? Anybody, maybe Brandon, do you want to kick us off and talk about how it came to be, the development process of it? And has Lin always been, this was his baby, right?
Yeah, so this actually, the concept began at DreamWorks, probably 10 years, I think it was about a decade before we even got it. It was a Peter Barsacchini's script with Lin writing the music. He actually had written a total of 10 songs to a story that was considerably different than what we ended up with. But what happens sometimes with these things is it went into turnaround at DreamWorks, and Sony was shopped around a bit, and Sony eventually was able to acquire it with the songs attached, and made some revisions. You know, when Kirk started on it, he collaborated with Kiara Hudes, who was the head writer for Lin on In the Heights, and they decided that it started out as sort of a creature comedy. There was no main human characters in the story necessarily on the journey, and Kirk decided that it'd be great if it was Vevo and another human. Kind of elevated the story and made it so that it wasn't one of those typical animated movies that you might see. And Kiara, of course, had the inspiration. I believe it was her. Well, I won't say it was an inspiration, but one of her relatives who sort of inspired the character of, which started out as Nacha, which became Gabby eventually. This character that's kind of the anti-princess, the marches to the beat of her own drum character, and who became sort of the agent of chaos in Vevo's world, the opposite of what Vevo's mentor in the entire story is, and the one that he would have to eventually collaborate with to finish his journey. So,
what was like the biggest kind of character moments that you guys kind of built in as it evolved? Was it like the relationship with Gabby and kind of having this buddy dramedy that you guys built? Like, how did that world come about?
Well, it was a long and arduous journey, and of course Erika can speak to some of this a little bit, but some of the biggest moments that we built in, of course, the song "My Own Drum" wasn't one of the original songs that was written for the movie. One of the difficult tasks of this was that because Lin is such a busy guy and he's always got 10 plates spinning, we were trying to build a movie around a collection of songs that were written for another story. So some of the songs worked great, especially the ones in Act 1 and Act 3, because we always knew our beginning and our destination. But a lot of the stuff in between was not conceptualized yet. And that song, "My Own Drum," Lin had said from the very beginning of the idea of Gabby that he wanted to write a theme for her, an anthem, if you will, that played as sort of the anti-princess theme. It was the opposite of an "I want" song. It was more of an "I know" song. She already was that character. There was no need for her to have a huge arc, even though some of it was to reconcile with those quote unquote friends that she wasn't accepted with in that social group. But she didn't need to be accepted. She was who she was, and as an audience, we didn't want that to change. So that was definitely one of the moments I think that was built in, and we just needed to find a place for it. And of course, the perfect place for it was when Vevo gets stuck with her at the very beginning of sort of their adventure, and she sings it and basically scares him out of the house.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when we started the film, we had these 10 original songs that Brandon alluded to, and they fit within the context of that story at that time. But as any movie that we've worked on, the story evolves over time, and literally, like within each year, we were discovering that some of the older songs Lin had written just didn't fit within the context of the story. They were amazing songs, and of course, it's like as an editor, you're always sad when you have to lose something, but when you're always looking at the bigger picture too, of like what's really servicing the story and the characters. And so we definitely had to lose some of those original songs, and then Lin had actually went in and actually wrote some new ones to coincide with the story process, and "My Own Drum" was definitely one of them. "Keep the Beat" was another one.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, Lin, there's 10 years difference between the time that he wrote those original songs. He obviously has become considerably better at writing songs. So some of the songs that came in later were even better than what we originally had. It elevated the movie in a considerable way.
You guys are all prolific in your own ways, like between design and editing and storyboarding and storytelling, and then you have Lin on top of it. To get to the story that is so amazing, you all did such an amazing job, and you can see the superpowers of all of you coming together to get to the version that was what are some of the different iterations or the challenges that you guys bumped up against, whether it's figuring out where the music and the storyline would come through, or talk a little bit about that process. I would love to hear from everybody in their own experience what that process was like.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I don't want to be the only one to speak. If anyone else has anything to add to that,
well, I mean,
talk all day.
it's interesting because we put up the movie so many times with different kind of variations on the story, and sometimes you head in a direction where you're like, oh, this is working, this is great, and sometimes you make decisions where it's like, we're going in the wrong direction. We gotta like get back on course, kind of a thing. And you're finding the characters and you're finding the emotion too as you're kind of going along the way and what works best. It's a process, and it's sometimes especially in animation, it could take years to really hone in on those characters and the emotion and the feeling and the atmosphere of everything. And of course, it not only is it about picture, but it's also about audio, and obviously the songs were a big part of that.
And to that point, like how? Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to add one of the in reference to your question, like the big iterations. One of our biggest issues was the idea of a villain. Many times with these big animated films, especially when it's a road trip, the idea that you need like some big villain to hold back your character or to cause havoc or to have your hero fight against. This movie fought against that idea, and so Joe can speak to all of these people can speak to this. There was a lot of iterations of and this need to make this villain, this super villain in this movie, and the movie story just kept rejecting it and rejecting it and rejecting it. Joe did so many iterations of different types of villains. We had sort of an animal control guy that was following the Vevo at some point, and the same with characters fighting against Gabby. So eventually we realized that it needed to be, which we had thought about towards the beginning, more of a Blues Brothers type adventure where there was obstacles throughout, there was characters, there might even be a mass of characters. I just thought there was also a point where there was a group of monkeys from Key West
That's right.
that were chasing them throughout the journey. And the tone and everything else just kept rejecting that idea. So in the end, it was just obstacles.
Yeah, in terms of the camera and the layout, the choreography of the film, this was my second musical animated film. The first one was The Trolls, and this is the second one. The Trolls was actually Justin Timberlake was the music producer on the show. Somehow that show was a lot easier for me to laying out because music didn't really change much once he sketches and then he put music on it. So during the layout process, like before we hand it off to animators to actually does everything based on the final rhythm and everything, it was quick. But our show, Lin continued working all the way up to, even during the animation, he was working still. When he does work, the lyric changes and rhythm changes, the beat changes, and then we had to continue support. And like there's so many different versions, iterations that we had to make. But eventually it came out really, really well. So I'm glad that we also had a music editor, Erika, right? So like continuously helping the music to support like production. The Lin was like non-stop developing, more evolving the music during the process. Even we thought it was done, but it's like, oh, we got more over here, and it kept changing, and it made the music a lot better. That's my experience on this one. Done speaking.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. And then what I wanted to also get an idea, and maybe Denise, you can take the kind of the reins on this one, but what is it like to kind of board for a musical? Like, is the boards first, then the music, or is it the other way around? Like, how is it as a board artist to kind of evolve the story?
Wow. It was really fun. We worked from Lynn's music, and oh my, I kind of am sad that there's so many different songs that didn't make it into the movie. But yeah, it was just being inspired by his music. I mean, just some beautiful songs that didn't make it were like Got No Game, brand new song, that one where Vivo says goodbye, says his final goodbye to Andreas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a lot of times we'll go from the script, and when you're doing a regular storyboard and you just go straight, but with the songs, you know, you have a freedom to play around a little bit with time and space and things like that. So
You did the sequence Inside Your Heart, like, which you truly nailed. Like, can you talk about like boarding out that sequence?
oh my goodness, I enjoyed that so much. It was, and then too, like, I'm going off of Lynn's voice. Lynn sang the song in the demo reel, and it was so beautiful. And then to have Gloria Estefan sing the final version, it just was unbelievable. I don't even know how to say, like, you got to put your whole heart and soul into it. So I'm like crying and drawing at the same time.
You did an amazing job with that sequence, Denise.
Oh, thank you.
It was so fun to put together.
The very end was like, man, I got to nail this reaction from Vevo, and that Andreas and Brandon suggested the tip of the hat for Andreas, and just drawing those two drawings over and over like 50 times, I think, to try to get that expression. But wow.
You know,
Huh?
every story artist has their strengths, weaknesses. You're always looking for story artists that are very versatile in what they can do. Denise is one of the most versatile story artists that I've ever worked with. I mean, I literally started my career in Denise's office. Learned a lot from her, but she knows camera, she knows humor. She can draw like a mad woman. I remember when I first began, she was doing storyboards in full color, which I thought was insane. But eventually, I mean, there's a couple things I just wanted to point out in that sequence. There's that beautiful shot when Mom does the U-turn, and the road turns into the bass strings of the bassist in the band. You know, does that beautiful rotate and transition. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and watch that. It's a beautiful. That was from the very first iteration of this song, and stayed with to the end. Obviously, the VFX people did a spectacular job in translating that, but that came from Denise's boards. And that's just one of the beautiful transitions that she contributed to this movie. Storyboard artists don't often think of that sort of thing, but she does. So
yeah,
it's great.
Thank you, Denise. That was amazing. No, seriously,
Prolific team.
You.
as an editor, when I saw that, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is an amazing transition.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you always make everything. You make us look a million times better.
I do want to shout out. There's one other song that was like a personal favorite of mine that we couldn't get into the movie, and which I tried so many times, but it was "Be Quiet." I don't know if you remember, Brandon.
Yes, I remember well.
Which was a Ludador song.
That was a good one.
Yeah, I really like that song. I think it was one of Lynn's favorites too, if I'm not mistaken.
Is it going to be on the B-side track?
Well, they were all They're all demos. That's kind of the interesting thing is that, when we first get all these songs, they're just really rough demos that we board to and edit and put together. Even, through layout, I think Young Duck, you had mostly demos that you were working off of, which is why when you get the final recordings, they're slightly different, in terms of even just pacing and stuff, which is why we had to keep going back in and kind of readjusting. But I don't know. I'd love to hear like a B-side of all the additional tracks, because there's some really, really good songs.
Well, my mind, this is Matt, I'm sorry, my mind is blown by that because I didn't know that. So how many, do we even have an answer for how many songs were written or that were originally at some point part of this movie that weren't part of the final cut?
There were 10 original songs that were written for the original draft, and that's what we initially got. And I don't know, Brandon, I want to say maybe two of the two, and there's a hybrid of like two other ones from the old versions, but I would say two or three remained kind of as they were. But Lynn still went in and rewrote some lyrics to kind of coincide with the story. So One of a Kind, Mambo Cabana, Lynn still went in and changed some of the lyrics, and Alex Lacamoire went in and redid a little bit of the music based off from the demo. So those songs even evolved, but the majority of the songs actually ended up being new going through. So there was a fair amount of songs from the original draft that just we couldn't work in, or we had in the movie for maybe a year or two, and they just weren't working.
Right.
Yeah,
There's a couple of the themes, I think, that ended up, sort of being strung into some of these newer songs. So you can kind of hear them. If you knew the old song, you're like, oh yeah, there's the theme to such and such. Sorry, I interrupted Joe there.
What's interesting is that there's a melody that Andreas plays on his Tris in one of a Kind when he's sitting down at the bottom of the tree, and that same melody is actually a part of what the song Old Friend used to be.
Wow,
cool.
That's astonishing. So,
Yeah, it is.
To follow up though on just the idea of music and films, I guess this is a question for you, Joe. In most animated films with music, there tends to be a clear separation from when a song begins and ends, and when prose or just regular dialogue begins and ends. But in Vevo, the characters are often singing prose. Can you tell me more? I mean, I know like Gabby in particular. Can you tell me a little bit more about the process used to make that happen?
Well, I think like just early on, Kirk and Brandon wanted to just do a pure musical, right? It wasn't a character just walking through the streets getting you from point A to point B in the narrative. So the fact that Vevo and Gabby are performing, and Gabby literally takes you into her own world, was really important to Kirk and was exciting for us on the design side. I think, early on, I think there was like 8 songs that we were considering doing an entirely different look to, which was insane from a production standpoint. And we had James Baxter animating 2D sequences to sort of reflect these styles, which was amazing. It's the work that was created. But the fact that we did get to do the Mambo Cabana look in 2D and reflect all the inspiration that we felt from the Cuban album covers was exciting, and we feel like it allows the viewers to be taken a little further on that journey in a more personal way,
Well, I had a question, but an identical question just came in via Instagram, so I'm going to actually flip it over. This is from JMM Garcia 9, but she was interested in, or he was interested in, if you could talk about the influences in the design for the character of Gabby and Ludador.
Yeah, well, I think just in general for the look of the film, Carlos, our production designer, and we talked frequently about pushing the style, and especially the sort of the graphic elements, the shapes of the characters. So I wanted to be as aggressive as possible without sort of balancing the believability. I didn't want to go so graphic that you feel disconnected. So there's still some warmth. So early on, we were looking at Cuban album covers. I was looking at the Cartelis magazine covers drawn by Andres Garcia, and other influences from sort of that mid-century graphic art period. And that's stuff that I'm already a fan of because I'm a huge fan of mid-century architecture, and Tom Ora was an elite designer. So initially, it was all about just getting a strong shape language and silhouettes that could, if you're in a theater, you want it to read from the back row. You're looking at the stage. The idea that Gabby was this distinct, maverick of a personality who has her own style, cuts her own hair, was really exciting. And the directors, producers, they allowed us a really huge playground to explore and really push our ideas. So what I think we get is a distillation of ideas that are strong silhouetted characters, and we're not being shy about more graphic shape language. Like if you look at Ludador, when I was first pitched the character, he was always a massive threat, but I tried to push the idea that he's this python that, I'm always creating backstories for these characters just so that I could understand them better. So Ludador in my mind was this prehistoric python that's been there for 1 million years, just lurking around eating giant animals, right? And the idea for his scales was I was looking at stained glass windows, and so I just took the idea of a stained glass window, shattering the glass, and almost like an arts and craft project, just like these shards were literally glued to his back, or they came up from his spine, whatever. But when they moved, they would reflect different colors and prisms to make it just more exciting because it's a musical. And then for Gabby, I did my best to sort of stay away from the prototypical sort of static, perfect little girl that we see in a lot of features. I really try to go against that to reflect her personality more. And then to go beyond that, the idea that she cuts her hair and she has this non-matching style and she doesn't care about what others think, hopefully you sort of get that sense when you look at her, before she even opens her mouth. And one other thing about the characters too, you might notice they have smaller hands and feet, and I did that on purpose because I knew the characters were going to be dancing. So I wanted to try to create this sort of tapered rhythm in all the limbs. Like everything sort of finishes. Like if you look at the top of Vivo's head, it tapers, and his feet, and his legs, and then we had the sort of static, thick tail that just runs throughout to sort of balance all of that. But when Vivo and Nacho are moving and dancing, I think you get the sense that these shapes sort of taper off into nothing, which I think, looking at ballerinas dance and move, that's kind of feeding off of that, how they point their toes, and there's a real sense of tapering rhythm. So I try to get that as well.
Wow. Very cool. Very interesting. But to follow up on the idea of the look of things, I mean, there are 4 settings throughout the film. So, I mean, there's Havana and Key West and the Everglades and Miami. Can you talk about how you define the look of each place, and then also how you weave music into each art design? So there's probably a number of panelists that can kind of weigh in on this question, but I'd like to get everybody's thoughts.
Young Doug.
Ready?
I thought Brandon, you were gonna say. We don't have a art director or production designer in this panel. I mean, they can talk more. But in terms of cinematography, we originally had about 10 different settings. That if we did our movie based on our original idea, we should have like 10 different pipelines to work on this show. because we have obviously there's 2D, there's a 3D, there's like a black lighting situations. There's so many different lighting scenarios and the technology that we needed. But it ended up something we were able to manage it. But in terms of cinematography, the Havana, yes, it was different from the Key West that we were shooting, and also my own drum. That's a completely different setup for the shooting and the settings and everything. At first, because we were so inspired by music, and based on the choice of the music, the cinematography had to change to support the story and the music in itself. So it's so much different from the love song. It's like, what's the love song's actual official title? But at the end, where Marta meets Andres at the end, that cinematography is very different from My Own Drum, Gabby's song. And it is also different from those two spoonbill flying up the sky with flying through those heart-shaped clouds. It was a very different. Yeah, it was everything was inspired by the music, and then design itself. Havana is very different from Key West. The lighting is different. The structure and the shape language is very different. So I had to work with those. In Havana, the lighting, the colors are more warm, more sepia. We didn't push so much colors because we knew we were going to push the kind of overexposed look and the colors when we got into the Key West, where Vivo's kind of new home. So in terms of camera, we were more gentle and controlled camera and a locked up camera at the very beginning when Vivo was in Havana. And then once we actually traveled to Key West through the Everglades and the Key West, that's when we actually used a little bit a wider lens, a little bit more dynamic cameras, and the compositions were slightly off because Vivo is in a completely new world. So the framing was a little bit off, something maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but towards the end, when he is completely a blended into the city, the world, he started to take in a center stage, a little bit more longer lens, more controlled camera again. So it feels a little bit more comfortable. As you see, I worked with Roger Deakins at this time. Again, this wasn't the first time I worked on Roger. I worked with Roger Deakins on Cruise with actually Erika right here, and Kirk DeMico, the director. We were a team, and then, so this wasn't something different from me. But Roger had a very strong idea of he really, really wanted to focus on the character, a performance and a character, not just for the beauty shot. He really, really wanted to focus on the character's performance and whose point of view it is. It's like when I put the cameras in, not just the literally point of view, like whose story we're telling. So it was different because new world, unsettled, nervousness, the energy went into the camera move and everything.
Yeah. I think another interesting aspect is the sound of the film overall and how it leads into the 4 different locations. I know Brandon, Kirk, and I were very conscious the whole time through of the soundscape of the film, and talking with Lynn and Alex Lackamore, and even our sound designer Randy Tom up at Skywalker Sound. And so if you really listen to the film, the ambiances in all 4 locations are very different. And Randy kind of supervised that part of it. And then just even the songs themselves, as you kind of go on this journey with Vevo, it's like when you go from One of a Kind, which is very, the Cuban flair, then you get into, My Own Drum, which is in Key West, and Gabby's room has this over the top kind of cheerleader rhythm section to it. And then Tough Crowd is in the Everglades, and it has this more tribal aspect to the music. And then you get into Running Out of Time, which has more of a Miami EDM kind of sound. So I think everybody was very conscious of also just the soundscape of the film and trying to make sure that as we get into each of these locations, the sound of the movie changes along with it.
I mean, you feel that process, like everything that you guys are talking about, Joe, like you having your backstories of your characters and how those are designed, to you talking about the Everglades and kind of the perspectives that you're pulling in, and Erika, how the songs all pulled together. It's really fascinating to hear how all these different pieces come together. I would love to hear a little bit about, we had heard that Sony has a tool that allows to create depth of field by dropping off detail in the background. How did that help in building all these visuals out?
Why do you?
If we have a Carl, he was our visual effects supervisor. He could answer really, really well. It was really creative process, wasn't it, Brendan? Trying to find the depth of field, how to visualize the depth instead of just putting a blurry, out of focus background, right? We
I
saw
remember
that
there was a
bunch
lot
of
of
example, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there was a lot of conversations between Carlos Zaragoza, our production designer, and as well as Carl Herbst, our VFX soup. Carlos, it's great because those two are like the yin and yang. They balance each other out completely when it comes to this stuff. I mean, Carlos shoots for the moon with everything, and then Carl kind of grounds him a little bit and translates what's going to go into the digital process. But we had a lot of meetings where, because Carlos wanted more than just a blur. He wanted this idea of paint strokes that showed in the background, and how much of that could be executed in the CG world and still retain a sense of realism, and balance out what we have in the foreground with the characters. Again, Carlos would be the best to speak to this, but I do remember just meeting after meeting of looking at, okay, so here's the iterations of what it's going to look like. And it's really cool now to watch the film, and if you are the type that pays attention to these things, you can see the beauty of what they created, particularly in Cuba is where I remember seeing a lot of the painterly strokes. But yeah, if you now watch it the second and third time, you can look at those backgrounds and see the detail and the fine craftsmanship that they executed, and of course with Young Duck's lighting genius, together with Roger Deakins. It's something that I don't believe I've ever seen before in animation.
Just a quick thing. At the very beginning, the depth of field, we thought about what about we actually do not have depth of field, and how to create the depth thing. Instead of adding depth of field, blurry images, how about we drop the texture? And then if it has so much details and texture, we actually make it a little bit dull with a little bit brush stroke, and then more and more to the far away how it's going to look like. So we tested with that one. We really liked it, but it was a sharp edges was the problem of its geometry, even though the texture was dull and a more beautifully added brush stroke. So eventually we ended up more compromising it. We still adding those brush stroke texture in the BG, and it added some depth of field, not as much as usual film, but a little bit lesser, because the brush stroke already took care of some of the distance layer issue. So if you're like geek of like analyzing every visual element, why don't you go back and then take a look at it? You will see what we're talking about. It's beautifully executed. Our effects team and the lighting team did really well. It was beautiful. Dawn speaking.
It was spectacular, and you can see like how it all came together. And to go back to kind of the character design, Joe, I would love to hear how you were able, I mean, you talked about the design and the silhouettes and needing them to stand out, which you did such a spectacular job of doing. How do you do that with like your main characters? Like Vevo being a Kinkajou. One, how did Vevo become a Kinkajou? Like, that's such a specific like brand of animal. And then two, like, how do you marry Vevo and Gabby and then the backgrounds together? Like, when you're designing, what's that process like?
Yeah, well, first question, there was a point where we were racking our brain on what kind of animal Vevo could be and that animal's potential, and we all sort of gravitated towards the kinkajou. The kinkajous. They don't have much representation, man, and we wanted to give that animal that. So, it's about time.
Yes.
And they're really interesting characters or animals. They could like turn their feet around and walk backwards, and they have these really long tongues, and I kind of explored that in the design stage, and I think people might have lost a little appeal.
Sure.
But he comes out like Gene Simmons, just long, that's as long as his arm. But the fact that they have the prehensile tails, and they're still very monkey-like in their movement, so I think people get confused. But I think it was refreshing to pick an animal with an interesting color palette and a story that hasn't been represented. And what was the second question? Sorry.
How did you marry the two mains of like Gabby and Vevo together? Like whether it's with color or design and with the silhouette,
Right.
and then also with Carlos's overall vision of how he wanted like the backgrounds. Like how do you marry those elements together?
Right. Yeah. Well, Carlos and I, we worked very closely from day one, and there's just so much love and respect between the two of us. He's kind of like my Spanish honey bear.
What was that, Joe?
He's my Spanish honey bear, I say. He's like the sweetest, like cutest guy in the world.
I think everybody needs to know that honey bear is a nickname for a kinkajou.
Yeah.
I think that's probably important that people know that. If they don't.
Good point.
Oh,
It's in the movie.
I thought it was a Starsky and Hutch reference.
Oh. It's funny.
Close.
It's funny. Yeah, he's the best. He's so sweet. I love him. He was a joy to work with. He just like Brandon mentioned earlier, he shoots for the stars. We were like kids meeting up with Santa and with a list of like 100 toys that we wanted going into this. So what we found our groove. I think just graphic silhouettes and shapes were so important to not just the characters, but to represent Cuba and Miami and Key West. So we identified, like a really strong silhouette shape language early on. And then from there we started talking about, the finer details. And we did look at some stop motion in terms of like trying to represent hair and fur, differently than your typical CG movie. And that's a lot of work. It really is an uphill battle. But I think we found a nice balance of sort of creating characters that have scale in their textures and their patterns. There's like a handmade quality, not miniature, so to speak, but there is a tactile quality that we went for, and I think we achieved. Like if you look at Gabby's hair, it's not just solid clumps. There's grooves that were built in. So I call them like canyons. So there's an ebb and flow in each piece to give each piece a dynamic sensibility, but it doesn't take away from the silhouette. And a lot of those things that we did with the characters were also echoed in the backgrounds. The size of the texture, the patterning, and and scale of the specific shots. Whatever happened to the characters would happen to the backgrounds as well. So it was awesome. Really rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like just the amount of magic was put into, and it really blossomed between the editing, the story, the characters, the directing. Again, you guys are prolific. All of it came together. Anybody on this Clubhouse talk get to visit Havana? Were you able to go and see? And did it make Like, did it change your influence of design or how you edited or even just research that you did?
Brandon?
I think I might be the only one here that made that trip. But yes, absolutely. First of all, what an experience. Something that I don't know if I'll ever. I mean, most Americans probably don't have a chance to go there, and I don't know if I'll ever have a chance to go again. But certainly, working on a movie about a real place is something I've never done before, and that was surreal. To actually walk into Plaza Vieja and see the place where Andres and Vevo actually play. The strange thing was that we had been working from pictures. Before that, Carlos Zaragoza, our production designer, was there as well, and the accuracy that they had already created from just the pictures alone was phenomenal to see, especially in that plaza there. Andres and Vevo's apartment is something that doesn't actually exist, but of course, based on the architecture of the buildings. One of the things that we learned while we were there is because they don't really have building managers, as you might in an American complex, an apartment complex. Each person individually takes care of their own space, and so that's why there's this very eclectic style of colors and textures and amount of work. That you might have one apartment that is completely blue and renovated, and the next one that has a bit of that age and texture on the facade. And so anyway, that's a little trivia for you in case you wondered sort of where that palette comes from. But yes, certainly looking and feeling the space, there's just something about being there that changes the way that you approach the art of it. I mean, experiencing it, breathing the air. I mean, we went in June, and probably not the best time to visit Havana. It was like everything just was humid and wet, and I even came back and said, "Can you just have the characters with a layer of sweat on them constantly?" I don't think we ended up doing that, but yeah, it was great.
Just a little shame.
Well, that actually ties into, so we have another question via Instagram. This is from Trisha. So I think, Brandon, you could probably speak to this, but if anyone else can as well. Did you learn anything about different cultures while working on the film? And if so, what? And how did it affect you?
Or anybody. Feel free to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a given. I mean, Kirk said this the other day, and I've never thought this before, but from the very beginning, we wanted to make a movie about something. And it's very hard to make a movie about something. I don't know if that makes much sense, but it wasn't just through going to Havana. We also talked with many consultants on this film to make sure that we were portraying the environment, the characters, everything about it. We wanted to be authentic. And of course, we learned a ton about the culture, about the people, and not just Cuba either. I mean, the Latinx community, because there's, Gabby's mom is Dominican. Anyway, it's again, I'm stealing this from Kirk, but I think making a movie about something is the only way to go. Honestly, it's the way I'd like to continue on with my filmmaking.
It's such, the balance is great between the characters and the storyline, and it being, I think Kirk had said that he wanted to make this a big stage musical. I would love Erika and Denise to talk about, and the rest to chime in as well. But like, how do you put everything together? How do you board out these big stages, these musical moments, but also the nuances of both Vevo and Gabby dealing with grief? There's, again, it's such a beautiful way that you guys intertwined these different themes, and I'm sure there's nuances that you had to balance of making this a big stage musical, and then again these nuances. So, Erika, Denise, can you talk a little bit about your process in getting that story just right?
Okay, for the musicals, when I was a kid, I used to watch all these Gene Kelly movies, and I wanted to kind of go back to that. So there's like Mambo Cabana, where I did some of the parts of Mambo Cabana. So trying to go back to that, and then looking at the posters and some of the old, like Celia Cruz. Oh, that's another thing too, is that there's a huge influence. We listen to a lot of music to try to get into this mood, and watching some old footage of nightclubs in Cuba back in the 50s. So trying to get that flavor and bring it to the screen for like Mambo Cabana and for Inside My Heart.
Keep going, Denise.
Oh no, go ahead.
No. If you have more to go for it.
What was the other thing about just the
nuance of balancing
the
a story
grief,
about,
like,
yeah.
Oh man, do I want to get personal?
Get personal.
Not too well. My mother passed away, and just using some of those emotions and putting that into those moments where Vevo has to say goodbye. The first time where he's in the plaza trying to put the flower on the altar, and he just can't do it. And then at the end, there was a larger sequence where he kind of made peace with his grief and said he's going to move on, and he found a new family. And so kind of using that emotion from my experience and then trying to put that into the film. So hopefully it landed, but yeah. So there's
thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your story.
Can I just add one other? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Erika.
No, go ahead, Brandon.
No, I didn't. I knew you were going to speak. Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. We're so polite.
I know we're like way too polite. So I think for me, it's interesting. I worked with Alan Silvestri on a couple of movies, going back to Lilo and Stitch, and he taught me quite a bit about just music. I actually, before I was even an editor, I learned music theory, and I'm a composer and a musician myself. And so I kind of approach editing in a similar fashion. Like I look at like almost like an editing timeline, as if I'm looking at a piece of sheet music. And so I remember talking to Alan about this, and just how, there needs to be peaks and valleys, just like in a piece of music, as well as in like the editing process, that it shouldn't just be like wall to wall, just in your face kind of moments, and to let things breathe and to let people have those moments so they can get a sense of like the grieving process that these characters are going through, or just the loud music of it all. Like really energetic kind of chase scenes, or even with Gabby's, My Own Drum, like really like hyping up the energy and the pacing of like a particular scene like that. And just on a personal note, for me, I'll share that I actually came out as transgender probably about 7 years ago, and Gabby really resonated with me as a character, just because she's marching to the beat of her own drum. And so there was so much of Gabby in this movie that I resonated with, and just kind of put a lot of my own self into that character as we were kind of forming and making the film itself.
Thank you as well for sharing your personal story. Like, I think that's from everything I'm hearing from everybody, I think another reason why it makes this movie so successful is, I think, the authenticity of the connection that you all have as artists in the making of this film. So really appreciate you sharing those tidbits. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. It is 1:30. Brandon, do you want to close us off, finish kind of the combo and add, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I felt like I was less than specific on that last question, and something came to mind that I really wanted to share. Speaking of personal, not necessarily personal for me, but what I realized is when I visited Havana, we were able to listen to street performers as well as actually go to a bar and hear a live band. And what I realized is I love music. Music is very personal for me. It's something that I'm very passionate about as much as I am of film. But I never experienced it the way that the people of Havana experience their music. And it may have been particularly this type of music that they were listening to, but there were themes in there of love, of politics, of anything that you can think of that's significant in your life. And what I saw was not only a young generation dancing to the music, but at the same time, I would look over and I'd see an older generation of people that were looking into each other's eyes and singing the lyrics of the songs to each other. And I realized that they were experiencing music on a level that I've never experienced it, because there was something about the lyrics and the message that was about their history that that resonated with them on a level that I don't know if I've ever listened to a Beatles song, with that same connection. And so that was something that I felt that we needed to portray in the film as well. So anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And thank you to all of our speakers who came on to Clubhouse today to share their amazing insights on this amazing film. Hope you all had an enjoyable time on your lunch hour hearing from these amazing humans. And what's next on our docket, Matt?
Next Wednesday at 12:30, we will be discussing Marvel Studio and Disney Plus's What If with head writer A.C. Bradley and members of the creative and production team. So we're very, very excited about that conversation. So please listen in.
All right, and please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at In Club to access our future talks. You can catch us every week on YouTube at Baobab Studios, on the Lightbox Expo Discord, and here on Clubhouse. So thank you everyone for joining. Again, thank you to everyone: Brandon, Joe, Erika, Denise, and Young Duck.
And congratulations on the movie, everyone. It's wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Please watch Vivo
Yes, watch Vevo.
with your kids or not.
With your Huggy Bear.
Oh yeah,
With your
yeah. Huggy Bear.
Maybe Carlos.
Or your kinkajou, whichever.
I love you, Joe.
Love you.
Love you.
Oh, that's so nice. End it on that note. Love you all. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye.